Welcome to the Tech Talks Daily Podcast, where you can learn and be inspired by real-world examples of how technology is transforming businesses and reshaping industries in a language everyone can understand. Here is your host, Neil C. Hughes.
Welcome back to the Tech Talks Daily Podcast, where I take the challenge of getting a different guest from the tech community and the world of business every single day and get them onto this podcast very seriously. But I've got to be straight with you. Sometimes I do feel like my head is going to explode when I look back at the previous month of 30 plus guests in 10 countries and multiple industries talking about things like 5G, machine learning, artificial intelligence, augmented reality, virtual reality, drones, cybersecurity, and so much more. But one thing that they all have in common, of course, is they're sharing how they're leveraging technology and sharing very human stories behind their success too. And today, I want to explore what is happening in the drone space at the moment, especially after reading how one of the big stories is the emergence of open source for drones. And a company called Auterion has found itself in an interesting niche in the industry by developing a drone operating system and analytics platform based on open source R&D that is rapidly gaining traction in that community. And it's my understanding that Auterion enables drone manufacturers to focus on the hardware so they don't have to worry about developing and constantly updating the software layer that controls the aircraft and captures and manages the data. And all that reduces R&D costs and actually enables companies to focus on innovating new applications, payloads, and focus on those key differentiators. And I felt compelled to find out more because I am armed with a curious mind. But I invite you all to join me in that conversation with the gang from Auterion now. So a massive warm welcome to the show, guys. Can you tell the listeners a little about who you are and what you do?
Hi, I'm Lorenz. I'm one of the two co-founders of Tyrion, and I have worked in the drone industry for the past 12 years, which is a very long time for this very young industry. And before founding Auterion, I founded a number of open source projects that are very widely used today. That includes Pixhawk, that includes PX4, the Maveling communication protocol. And these are adopted by pretty much all of the Western drone manufacturers, drone service providers who use some of the open source or commercial autopilots. And with Auterion, we're offering this open source software now for the first time as a commercially grade software stack, integrated and easy to use.
Hi, everyone. This is Kevin. I'm the other co-founder at Auterion. And I see my sweet spot being between the intersection between technology and business. And I did that for the last 10 years, first as a strategy consultant, where I helped large companies optimize their processes and go to market with new products using the latest technologies. And then in the later part, where I joined one of the largest drone companies in the Bay Area in Berkeley, and there as the first enterprise product manager, I helped the company make the big transition at the time from a consumer hardware manufacturer to become a B2B software company. And we did that by bringing to market a product that allowed construction and engineering companies capture real-time 3D data of the environment and using that data to optimize their workflows. Today at Auterion, I am leading the go-to-market and marketing strategy, as well as our operations and finances.
Well, it's an absolute pleasure to have you both on today because I love the work that you're doing. But I am conscious we're going to be having a lot of people listening all over the world that are hearing about Auterion for the very first time. So could I ask that you begin by setting the scene and telling me a little bit more about exactly what Auterion is and how it found itself in this interesting niche in the industry, developing a drone operating system and analytics platform?
Yeah, so the story of Auterion is one of these great organic stories where you're starting with a problem and then you create a solution around it. So it's not a technology push. So as I mentioned in my intro, I've created these open source projects, and then they grew into worldwide adoption. And it became very apparent to me around 2016, so a good year before founding the company, that there were more and more people asking me for improvements to the software, to the flight control software, which I did back in the day. Also things around, well, how do we connect a camera? How do we go with our product, with the software to market? And most of these applications have been in the enterprise space. Some are also in the consumer, but mostly enterprise. And I had two choices, doing that as a consultant and helping individual companies, or really trying to solve this at scale, because this is a common need, and create a product company around it. And that is what Auterion has become. As a company, what we're solving is we're providing an enterprise software distribution for commercial drones, but in a modern way. So we're not providing, like enterprise Linux like you did in the 90s. We're providing a SaaS product. So we have a cloud suite which hosts all that software, provides software updates, allows you to manage your devices, and our operating system, which runs on the drone, Enterprise PX4, is connected to that, together with a ground station. So in a way, Auterion is similar to Red Hat in its industry positioning. So we're enabling enterprises to safely and securely use open source software. But in terms of technology, what we're offering is probably much closer to Android, where you have a complete set that enables a smartphone. In the case of Android, in our case, it's a smart drone. We can even install apps on the vehicle with our software stack. And the same way as Android really benefits from the cloud services that it enables via apps on the phone, our operating system on the drone really brings the cloud, brings the internet to the drone. And that's what makes it so different from everything else that has been around in the industry so far. Because up until now, we have pretty much just flight controllers that you can fly manually, or maybe waypoints, but it's not really about mapping, solving problems. It's very limited still when it comes to the drone itself. And we're rethinking this really from the ground up, the same way as the introduction of the iPhone or the Android phone have rethought how we use our phone. And one episode I'd like to quickly tell is that right now we have very often the question from our customers which say like, yeah, I'm not sure I need 4G on my drone. I don't think I need the internet. Now I need to get a subscription. And it's like, first, it's optional, of course. And the second thing is, we have heard this before, haven't we? So when smartphones were introduced, people were also like, why do I need internet on my telephone? And the screen is too small. And why would I read a website there? Or I will never, ever order something on my phone. And it's very similar. So we get a lot of questions around like, okay, how is this going to play out? And that shows to me that we're really at an inflection point in this industry.
And I'm curious, was that all part of the master plan, or did you actually find yourself in this exciting niche completely by accident?
I've been asked that question a number of times over the last decade, because of course the open source project itself, its success also has the same question behind it. And I would say, to me, all of this has been from probably 2011 on, so for the past decade roughly, after the first couple of years, has been always an option. So it has always been an option that the open source project might grow really big and be the prime spot in the industry. I always had the ambition to leave that door open. You cannot plan for it. And the same is true for Auterion. I always wanted the open source software that I created to be really easy to use, both in terms of usability, but also in terms of commercial adoption, because that's how you create the most impact. And I couldn't have told you like 5 or 10 years ago that I would create a company around it. That was sort of open. But I was hoping that somebody created a company that would use this open source software. And so is this a big master plan? I don't like when people retroactively declare it a master plan. But had I always thought about this playing out this way? Yes. So yes, it was always an option. And the one proof point to that is PX4 as an open source project has a permissive license, which is easier to use for businesses. And it was clearly a consideration in 2011 to say, like, if I'm giving away all the source code for free that I'm developing in my spare time, and others are doing so too, let's make sure the most people can benefit from it. And let's not exclude commercial usage, because it just makes sense that companies bring this open source project as part of their solution to end users who really then benefit from it.
And can you tell me more about this ecosystem that you're building and the kind of problems that you're trying to solve with it?
I think, again, here it comes back to the organic development of that ecosystem. And I think we're here looking back on this incredible trajectory because companies, developers, researchers at universities are trying to make the technology useful, to enable the end user, eventually the drone operator, the company operating drones, to do a better job at what they're doing, and in doing so using the latest technology. So if you look at this ecosystem, I think there are 4 main players in it. One are the drone manufacturers, of course, that build a vehicle, a system using that technology. You as well have technology and components providers. Those are companies building sensors, compute modules, cameras, gimbals to hold the cameras, and of course have an interest to make their components and technology useful to their customers, which are the drone manufacturers. More and more, you have the SERP players, which are software companies coming into play, as Auterion, but as well as other companies that use drone data and make that useful to companies. For example, doing 3D stitching on images to recreate 3D models of the environment, or using, for example, AI to recognize if there are any failures or problems into a wind turbine, for example. And then lately, more and more, we see service companies that use this technology, use the systems, the drones, and the software to provide a service to a large number of different verticals in the industry. So those are companies that hire pilots, have a fleet of drones, operate a fleet of drones, and work, for example, for construction companies analyzing and scanning their construction sites on a daily or weekly basis. All of those players, all of those 4 players have an interest to make their services or products available to a broad market. And they know they can do that better in a more scalable way if their components and technologies are integrated into a larger ecosystem. That, for example, means that a camera company can go to market in a more scalable way if their camera is just a plug and play into a compute system that is on a drone. A service company, for example, knows that if the data they're capturing with their drones is automatically integrated with a cloud service, their service quality increases. So each one of those players has an interest in working together, and that is the reason, or one of the reasons, how this ecosystem organically grew and got to the size where we are today.
And I believe it's also open source, and it's gained a broad adoption worldwide, and it's often comparable to the Linux for drones. But can you expand on that and tell me more about the number of users and the size of the community that you're serving out there?
I think there are two important, or there's one important differentiation to be made. Auterion as a company is really focused on enterprise users. So we're the largest contributor to the community, over 50%, but we're not the only one, and that's very, very healthy and very important. And then in terms of adopters, so we have close to 10,000, maybe just over 10,000 adopters. You can see that on GitHub. This is a number that's ticking up constantly. And these are just the people who took the code and created a local working copy. So they're not necessarily wandering off. They're just, using it in their own project environment on GitHub. And that means they're really, really using it. They're changing software. In terms of actual end users, that's hard to track because it's an open source project. But if 10,000 people are developing actively on it, you might expect that we have a multiple of that. So hundreds of thousands or more of actual users. And these users are in R&D. They are also including for wider PX4, not for Auterion, hobbyists who built their own drones. And PX4 has been good for that for a decade now. And then the next question is, okay, how much are you actually getting back? And we are having hundreds of contributors across the different projects, well over 500, because it's multiple repositories. It's again a bit hard to track, but PX4 alone has close to 400, and that's just one out of maybe 30, 50 software packages that run on a drone in our stack, and that means those numbers are a bit hard to relate to, right? Is that a lot? Is that few? I think for the size of the drone industry, it's a lot. It's really, really a lot. And it's also the prime thing that people use PX4 for any commercial product when they start building it. And that's also why it's so nice and complementary, because as Auterion, we are providing a much more complete software stack than just the PX4 flight control kernel, but we're providing something that is compatible with it and built around it. So any of these 10,000 developers who are using this open source project, if they want to build an actual product, they can just continue to use what they're used to and get a much more complete solution. And typical things include data link management. We're supporting live camera streaming and camera controls, something that PX4 as an open source project doesn't do. And this is, of course, really important to build a drone product because most drones right now are carrying cameras.
And just to help anyone listening understand the scale of what we're doing here and how it would work in their world or their business, do you have any examples of companies who are building components, products, and solutions that are compatible with these open standards?
Yeah, there are hundreds of it. Let me try to pick some good examples that also show the different user persona, different corners that we see in this ecosystem. On one side, you have smaller companies, startups, and here a good example is Avi. It's a Dutch company that builds a small cargo drone that can bring a package of 1-2 kilos. And they consider themselves a drones for good company, and they operate, they've done pilots and operate drones in the Netherlands together with the Dutch emergency service, and as well in several African countries. And to me, that is like a very good example of how out of a smaller companies, or how a smaller company can have a very large effect on how we live and how we experience cargo drones. On the other side, larger companies as well are adopters of some of the standards of the open source ecosystem. One of them is GE Aviation. which is one of the largest autopilot companies in the world, working together with some of the largest aviation companies. They are building a flight controller that is based on the open source standards, that flies the open source software, uses the open source communication protocol, and are using that and are targeting with that product larger vehicles, potentially going into the direction of larger cargo drones or even urban air mobility, which is one of the biggest trends that we've seen in the past couple of years. And then finally, I think the other interesting persona, and that a persona that has just recently seen the ecosystem and adopted the ecosystem are governments that more and more are investing into the ecosystem. And they do that because they generally hate two things. One is the locking into property solutions. And they see that by working with larger or legacy aerospace companies. And the second is the slow development of large aerospace companies. If we think that in the open source ecosystem and also on the consumer side, you see new drones coming to market on a yearly basis, and where government contractors usually take multiple years to bring a drone to market. This is a real advantage of basing your solution on top of open source and open standards.
And what kind of trends are you seeing in the drone space right now? Because the whole world seems to be upside down at the moment, but I'm wondering if there are any particular trends that you're seeing in this area?
I think a big trend that we're seeing already since a couple of years is consolidation. And that is a usual trend you see in many nascent industries. At the beginning of any new technology, as a startup or a company building products with that technology, you want to own the whole user experience, the whole value propositions to the end user. So in our industry, that meant that companies would build their own hardware, their own vehicle, build their own software, build their own application on top, and then maybe as well hire their own pilots to offer a service to companies. And today, since the industry is growing, we see a change from this vertical integration to a more horizontal integration, a bit similarly to the different players that we touched base before in this interview. We see companies focusing on what they can do best, and that may be hardware, software, or services. And in all those different layers, we see an increased interest into hardware. So and a growing number of companies that focus on building either cameras or even full vehicles, but that not necessarily are building their own software for it.
And what excites you about the future of the drone industry? Because like I said, it does feel like there's a lot of uncertainty out there at the moment, but I always like to end on a positive note. So what is it that excites you about the future of the industry?
So right now we're seeing that regulations are starting to really come into place, and that might actually sound like it's limiting, but it's actually unlocking potential, because now there are clear rules for certain operations, including flying beyond the visual line of sight of the pilot, called BVLOS, really important for cargo. Then, of course, the current situation has all unlocked new potentials for contactless delivery, contactless cargo. So I do believe that there is a new level of energy in that area. And so we're following that closely, and we expect to have customers in that space. And overall, what is really sort of closing the circle for me is I went into drones because I wanted to build an autonomous robot back as a bachelor student. And now drones are really becoming the first widely deployed autonomous systems that really move in freely in the world. So very different to lawnmowers or vacuum robots or factory robots. They're all constrained to an environment. And autonomous cars have been promised for 2020. They're not here yet entirely. But autonomous drones are starting to really operate slowly but steadily. And so I think that's really, really exciting.
And what about Auterion? What's next for you guys? I appreciate you can't share too much, but is there anything you can leave us with?
I think we just released great news last week. We launched a new product called Skynode, which is a smart autopilot that combines the flight controller, the mission computer, so the smarts on the drone, and LTE communication, so that we can really bring apps and smart applications to drones. And we'll be focusing the next 3-6 months to support drone manufacturers to bring to market products that leverage Skynode and the Auterion platform, and at the same time help enterprises, drone operators to leverage those drones and make use of them to optimize their processes and streamline their operations. So all in all, I think with Skynode, we open a new era for Auterion that really helps the industry, our customers, to go to market quicker, build new solutions quicker, and doing all that leveraging the open source ecosystem that we find ourselves in.
And for anyone listening that would like to find out more information, what's the best way of finding you guys online, and equally contacting your team if they'd just like to ask a question?
For companies and corporations, I think Auterion.com is the best address. For developers, researchers, or people that want to get started and build their own system, I think px4.io, which is the website of the main open source project, would be the best address.
Excellent. Well, a huge thanks to both of you for joining me on the podcast today. I love the story that you shared there of how Auterion has found itself in this interesting niche in the industry by developing this drone operating system and analytics platform, all based on open source R&D. And I love how it's rapidly gaining traction as a result. But more than anything, just a big thanks again for both of you for joining me today.
Same here. Thank you very much, Neil.
Thank you. Have a great day.
I love how Auterion is building an ecosystem of hardware platforms that are unified around that single software system, especially with this consortium of companies that are mounting a credible challenge against that market leader DJI and chipping away at that market dominance bit by bit. And the project, of course, was started by Lorenz over 10 years ago, but it counts more than 8,000 users, which made up of individuals and companies, not to mention 600 plus contributors. And because the project is open sourced, it has gained broad adoption worldwide and is today compared to the Linux for drones. I just love that open source nature. Hundreds of companies building components, products and solutions that are all compatible with these open standards. That's the geeky stuff that rocks my world. But if we have anyone listening from the community, please email me, techblogwriter@outlook.com, tweet me at Neil C. Hughes, and my website is techblogwriter.co.uk. I'd love to hear what you thought of today's conversation, so please keep those messages coming in. But now I'm going to sit down and have a think about which interview to show you all tomorrow. I think we've set the bar high after today, but don't worry, I'm going to rise to the challenge once again. So thanks for listening, and until next time, don't be a stranger.
Thank you for listening to the Tech Talks Daily Podcast with Neil C. Hughes. Remember, technology works best when it brings people together.